Southern Baptist churches will often say, we're autonomous. Each local church decides. And technically that's true. SBC churches are congregationally governed. But here's the catch. Their pastors are trained, vetted, hired, and shaped within an SBC theological ecosystem. Seminary training, denominational statements, pastor networks, and church discipline expectations all point back to the SBC's long position that Matthew 19:9 on sexual immorality is the only clear ground for divorce. The Evangelical Covenant Church condones divorce for adultery and abandonment, but not for violence or emotional abuse or addictions. Calvary Chapel says divorce is valid for sexual immorality and abandonment only if the spouse is an unbeliever. This chart helps you anticipate support or resistance before you're vulnerable.
Welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be briefly highlighting the work of Gretchen Baskerville, the author behind The Life-Saving Divorce. I am highlighting her today because this video is excellent. She put together a 9-page document going through each of the Christian denominations, the major Christian denominations, and goes through their individual denominational criteria for whether or not a divorce is biblical. And from her website here, titled Divorce Policy Comparison Chart, 40 Church Denominations, originally posted August 19th, 2020. Here we see a screenshot of the comparison chart, and underneath that we see About Me. If you're new to my blog, read this first. I'm a committed evangelical Christian. I attend, I tithe, I serve, I volunteer, I lead Bible studies. I started leading Christian divorce recovery groups in conservative churches in 1998. Despite what we were taught, the vast majority of divorces are not for frivolous reasons. I write about, quote, life-saving divorces, end quote, those divorces that are for very serious reasons. Quote, life-saving divorces, end quote, make up nearly half of divorces here in the United States. Read the definition here, linked here. If you want to know why you should have a nuanced view of divorce, see this, linked here. And here is the biblical rationale for condoning divorce, linked here. Although I believe many divorces are treacherous, immature, or sinful, I also believe that some are gifts from God to protect innocent spouses and their children. Side note, I would disagree with the author here in saying that your divorce is up between you and your spouse. There is nothing, in my less than humble opinion, that I need to know about your divorce that someone else outside of your relationship or outside of being a very close friend should know about your divorce. And even the church shouldn't know about your divorce. Because, as we saw featured in the one comment, the author herself admits that evangelical women who go through divorces are at a high risk of getting excommunicated from their churches solely because they divorced, while the church ignores the abuses that were reported to them. Below that, we get to the meat of the article. Comparison chart, 40 church and denomination policies on divorce and abuse. Note that this is in bold. Ending bold and continuing on, this chart compares more than 40 churches and denominations and associations using their own official online divorce policies, which are public. They are often explicit about what divorces they condone. They may also have vague wording in their policy. So this, quote, bold, church and denomination policy on divorce and abuse comparison chart, end quote, and bold, parentheses, click that link, and parentheses, mentions only what they say explicitly. Note that the word explicitly is in bold, because unless it is clearly stated, physical and emotional abuse victims don't know whether they will find support to leave or whether they will be required to stay married to a destructive, dangerous person. Where there was no written policy online, the researchers added analysis, indicated by brackets and italics, for example. Parentheses. Analysis of this denomination suggests it prohibits divorce. End parentheses. Click here, those words are in all caps, for the 12-31-2025 update link to the divorce policies compared for these denominations/groups. Here is the Dropbox link. I'm going to continue down. As usual, all links for these will be in the description of this video. But I'm going to specifically highlight this article because she goes through 8 common questions about the 40 church policies on divorce. Question 1, in bold. Where did you find this information? In bold. Answer, I went to the official website of each organization. I've posted the links to each site. Question 2, in bold. Do you have evidence that half of divorces in the U.S. are for very serious issues, not frivolous at all? In bold. Answer, yes, I do. I remember the sermons at my old church that suggested that most divorces were for, quote, falling out of love, end quote. And while there are some that fall in that category, according to 4 major studies, about half of divorces, linked here, are for very serious things: adultery, sexual immorality, physical abuse, emotional abuse/control, addiction. According to 4 major studies, about half of divorces, linked here, are for very serious things: adultery, sexual immorality, physical abuse, emotional abuse/control, addictions, abandonment, or severe neglect. Question 3, in bold. Are there Bible verses that indicate that abuse is biblical grounds for a divorce? In bold. Answer, yes. Both physical abuse, parentheses, including intimidation, striking, restraining, throwing things at or near someone, end parentheses, and emotional abuse, parentheses, threats, lies, concealment, deceit, end parentheses, are biblical grounds for divorce. See verses listed here, linked here. Question 4, in bold. I've heard divorce will destroy me and my kids. Is that true? In bold. Answer, no, that's not true. In fact, 8 in 10 kids come out fine after divorce, and 7 in 10 Christian adults say they are happy after divorce. Often churches have been given misinformation about the effects of divorce on divorcees and children. Side note, those same churches and pastors that she references here, and I am not afraid to say this, they will gladly continue spreading the misinformation to prevent divorce. Continuing on, they will tell you that you will never be happy again, linked here. Your next marriage will end tragically too because, quote, you'll bring your problems into the next marriage, end quote, and that your kids will be destroyed, linked here, have drug/alcohol/behavior problems, linked here, and their marriages will fail too, linked here. But all of this is incorrect. According to 20 years of research, none of these are true, linked here, for the vast majority of people who need to escape from long, destructive, or unfaithful marriages. There's research showing that you are likely to be happier if you leave a long, destructive marriage. In fact, a study using Baylor University data shows that 7 in 10 Christians are happy after divorce. That includes all divorces, both life-saving and not. And remember, Baylor is the largest Baptist university in the world. See the graph below. Here, the author has included a screenshot of that graph from Baylor University. And note that below that it says data, Baylor Religion Survey 2014. Continuing on the list of questions. Question 5, in bold. Can a church legally prohibit my divorce, ... or remarriage, in bold. In the United States, churches have no legal say as to whether you divorce or remarry. They may pressure you. They may prohibit you from remarrying on their premises. Note that the words their premises are italicized. Or having their staff. Note that the words their staff are italicized. Officiate or conduct the ceremony. But they have no legal control over your decision. They cannot block you. Marriage and divorce are civil matters in the U.S. court system, not religious. Moving on to question 6, in bold. Can a church excommunicate or discipline me if I divorce for abuse, in bold? Answer, Yes, a minority of churches feel entitled to excommunicate wives, linked here, parentheses mainly, end parentheses, for not staying with their abusive, destructive, or seriously unfaithful spouse. They believe they have the right to require you to stay with an abuser until they are satisfied that you've been abused enough, which seems to fly in the face of the words of Jesus, linked here, and Peter, linked here, who prohibit this kind of control. If you are being threatened with church discipline or excommunication for wanting a life-saving divorce, click on the link, linked here, for tips and information. Find I believe she means out, your options in the face of excommunication or church discipline, linked here. If you are an abuse victim, it may be best to keep it secret from your pastors or leaders and to switch churches before you file for divorce. Here, linked here, are some first-person stories, legal opinions, and actual court cases, along with a church membership resignation letter and instructions on how to send it. These types of churches that are deaf to the suffering of sisters and brothers in Christ have driven away more than 1 million evangelical divorcees away from the church, linked here. It's a serious problem that is well documented. Question 7, in bold. I love the Lord, I love God's word. Can I find a better church? End bold. Answer, yes, there are good churches and pastors, linked here, that don't hold the innocent spouse responsible for the marriage endangering sins of their mate. We know the heart of Jesus on these matters. Jesus made a big point to release a captive woman from a spirit that bound her in disability for 18 years. ... And he did it on the Sabbath, linked here, which angered the religious leaders who thought they knew the mind of God. And we also know from the Good Samaritan story, linked here, that many religious leaders will walk on the other side of the road rather than dirty their hands by supporting your desire to divorce and leave a toxic spouse. In bold, about 6 in 10 Protestant Christian divorcees switch churches when they divorce, end bold. According to a study done by Lifeway Research, parentheses, the Southern Baptist Research Arm, end parentheses, on behalf of Focus on the Family. Lifeway surveyed active churchgoers who had attended before their separation/divorce. These weren't, quote, cultural Christians, end quote, or, quote, carnal Christians, end quote. Many were volunteering, serving, and active in their churches. Below that, we see another inset image of the results of that study. And finally, question 8 in bold, how do I find another church? I don't want to make a mistake, end bold. Answer, how can you find a better church? When I vet churches for people, I listen to the marriage sermons. Note that the words marriage sermons are in bold, of pastors online, parentheses, if possible, end parentheses. In their marriage sermons, I listen carefully. Do the pastors/leaders mention any acceptable reasons for divorce? Note that the word any is in all caps. Do they ever list examples of physically or emotionally abusive behaviors and tell the listeners these are unacceptable? Do they require you to get a certain amount of counseling from their hand-selected, parentheses, marriage at any cost, end parentheses, counselors before you divorce? Do they look down on those who choose to divorce and describe them as quitters who took the easy way out? Do they vilify the one who files the legal paperwork rather than the one who abuses? I listen for the 27 myths, linked here, of divorce. If I hear this kind of message, I move on to the next church. Here's one woman's story, linked here, of trying to find a church. She's a conservative Christian who wants to bring up her teens at church. But how does she find a church that won't condemn her and look down at her kids? After all, in italics, the word she wasn't the one who committed adultery over and over. Her ex-husband did. But don't worry if you cannot find a loving church. You're not alone. At least 1 million Christians love the Lord, identify as evangelicals, and still cannot find a church that doesn't judge divorcees. Here's the good news. Now, many good churches have their services online, and you can find a church in another state that will suit your needs. Here's a list of pastors' sermons and blog who believe in divorce in cases of abuse, linked here. I've included a wide variety of denominations, so there may be one who's right for you. Bonus question, in bold. What would Jesus say about convoluted theological wordsmithing in some of these divorce policies? End bold. Answer. We know from Luke 13 that Jesus wanted to get people out of bondage, and he wasn't willing to follow the religious leaders' rules to do so. We know Jesus was willing to face their criticism. Jesus knew the leaders would accuse him of breaking the law. He knew they would accuse him of being, quote, liberal, end quote. He knew those religious leaders would be so angry at his compassion that they would eventually kill him. Jesus turned the tables and attacked the legalistic religious rulers, saying, quote, "You jerks treat animals better than this," end quote. Parentheses, Luke 13, end parentheses, linked here. And he's right. If an animal was treated with neglect and hostility we see in some Christian homes, the owner would be arrested and not allowed to own or adopt animals ever again. We are called to imitate Christ. We are called to follow Christ's example, and he sided with mercy and setting the captives free. Here ends the question section. All good questions and answers, and I appreciate the author featuring them here. I would have appreciated a little side blurb of encouraging people to go out and find their own meaning, their own spirituality in life. But I also know that the author here is an evangelical Christian. There's one last section here, in bold, errors, corrections, and updates, end bold. This entire paragraph is italicized. Churches frequently change policies. If you have an update or find an error in this chart, please report it with as much detail as possible, including exact quotes, page numbers, URLs, and specifics to lifesavingdivorce.com/contact. All information within this chart is from publicly available material posted online by the church or denomination itself, and so the only changes I will make must be from official policy documents from the organization, not meeting notes, blog posts, parentheses, unless an official statement from the organization's leader, end parentheses, or commentary, end section. Below that, the author encourages you that if you're going through a life-saving divorce, there's a private Facebook group that she hosts called Life-Saving Divorce for Separated or Divorced Christians. She also promotes her book down below, and she also features below that her 50 most popular blog posts. Please consider checking her out. The work that she is doing is very necessary considering that we have so many Christian denominations, but all have differing views of abuse, but all seem to have no problem with putting souls at stake in return for having marriages that look long and pretty on the outside, but could contain abuse on the inside, because to them, that's not the real abuse that deserves divorce. Thank you for watching/listening, and I will see you in the next video.